Now, today's show is super exciting. Actually, a better word might be electrifying. The planet that we're going to talk about is super electric. It's a weird one. It's known as the Great Liberator and the Great Destroyer, and it is the planet Uranus. It's a powerful outer planet that gets a bad rep in terms of relationships. People often fear Uranus transits to the 7th house or their own Venuses or the Venuses of their loved ones, but I'm here to tell you, fear not. We're going to dispel some of the myths and also examine some of the iterations of Uranus that do shake and break. Now, my guest today is a mercurial master of astrology. This man has a bigger Virgo stellium than anyone I know, so kudos to him on that. Tony Howard is a master astrologer, a teacher, and a writer who's been studying astrology for decades. First learning from his babysitter at 15 years of age. Talk about fate. In his own words, Tony says, "My work is to help translate the symbolic language of astrology to help others consciously seek inspiration, creative solutions, and fresh insight using the cosmos as a guide." Tony started Astrology University in 2011, which has an incredible 4-year curriculum that I happen to be enrolled in. So, let's give a huge AstroPop welcome to Tony Howard. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much, Camilla. It's so great to be here with you.
When I enrolled into Astrology University, it was a really hard time in my life, and I just have to thank you so much from the bottom and top of my heart, because the school is not only amazing, but it served as an anchor for me that I've been able to hold on to. Your contribution to astrology, your contribution to keeping it diverse and accessible to everyone is beautiful. So I have to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. That's so lovely to hear. You know, there are just so many fringe benefits to the school that I didn't even know were going to happen. And that's one of them, that sense of community that we create, but also just being there with each other every weekend. You know, we have Q&As, as you know, almost every weekend. We take a break between each course, but we're together a lot. And it really can provide an anchor when you're going through tough times. You know, I was just noticing recently this week how what a relief it is to tune out the world and get to work, so to speak, and spend some time in that zone. And when you're able to do that with such lovely people as yourself, it's just so enriching.
It really is. And enriching really is the word. It's very thorough, and I wouldn't expect anything less from a Virgo stellium such as yourself. Now, let's get weird. Okay? We're going to talk about Uranus. Tony actually has Uranian aspects in his own chart, in the chart of his longtime partner. I'm actually kind of a Uranian girl myself. I've got Uranus square my Mars. So let's talk about it. Some of the keywords that I can think about offhand are, I said, let's get weird, or fringe, outside of societal norms, off the beaten path. What else do we got, Tony?
Yeah, revolutionary, reactionary. One that's really standing out right now is disruptive. Yeah. With the energy of in the world right now, and channeled through certain key figures who have strong Uranus aspects to their sun, for instance, and kind of channeling that disruption in the world. Disruption can be a great thing. You know, Uranus in our solar system occupies space beyond Saturn, and Saturn is the limits of known reality and its structure and its limitation and restriction. And Uranus kind of says, F that. and it's about breaking free from restriction and breaking structures apart. And not necessarily with an interest in putting them back together. Uranus is the piece that just breaks things up, and then it's up to us or the other planets or the other parts of us to restructure things.
Absolutely. And one of the things that, I think was key for me in learning about Uranus is truly it's about authenticity. And it tends to disrupt and break things apart when they aren't authentic, when you're not being true to yourself. I think learning that was really helpful to me, because initially you think of midlife crisis transits, for instance. All right, I'm just going to get my red Ferrari and say, fuck it all, fuck my relationship. I'm just destroying it. When in actuality, for someone to do that, perhaps they weren't necessarily being true to themselves in the first place. They were sticking to some script based upon society's expectations.
That's such a great point. Yeah, that's such a great point, because Uranus sometimes helps us break free from that which is not us, right? So we go through Uranus transit and something falls apart. Maybe it's a job, maybe it's a relationship, often kind of dramatically, because Uranus carries that energy or the image of the lightning strike. So sometimes it happens quickly and we don't see it coming. But then upon reflection, I hear clients will say things like, well, actually, I'd been planning to leave that job for a couple of years. It wasn't really me. I didn't really like it. Now I have to really put myself on the line and ask myself, what's really me? Who do I want to be now? Sometimes Uranus helps us break free from limits that we've set on ourselves, but sometimes it helps us break free from limits that we've taken on that aren't really ours. And that gets us to that process you're talking about of individuation, where we realize, oh, I went to med school and I'm a doctor and I kind of hate it. And I realize now that actually this was my dad's idea and I never wanted to do this anyway. And I just kind of went along. Some people actually have that realization, believe it or not, only after going through med school and getting the job. That's just the way life works sometimes when we've accepted someone else's programming. Hadley Fitzgerald, one of our instructors and one of my colleagues, has a great idea for Saturn. She says, don't outsource your Saturn. Claim your inner authority for yourself. When we've claimed someone else's authority for ourselves, Uranus comes along and says, hey, guess what? That's not yours. I'm going to take that away.
Boom. I'm going to shatter that, right?
Yeah, totally.
So let's talk about the mythology a little bit, just briefly, in terms of like the Greek mythology of Prometheus and how that links to our archetype of Uranus and those particular keywords that we spoke about, particularly with, I think, the fire, electricity, and there's an astrologer named Mark Husson that I've listened to for years. He really keyed into, I guess, well, the end part when Prometheus is tied up and isn't it like there's some kind of crow or something eating his liver
yeah.
or something like that? So that sounds fun. Right. Not that part. But what he keyed into was the disassociation and distance that can sometimes happen with Uranian people. And he kind of basically attributed that to not being able to deal with chaos and having to disassociate in a way, having to put your mind somewhere else or perhaps the future, because that's also Uranian, to just kind of distance yourself from that. So I thought that was interesting. But let's get into the mythology.
One of the key parts that stands out that's important archetypally for us is that Prometheus basically defied the gods and gave fire to all of us humans down here, right? So it has that element of something divine coming in. And also, if you think about it, it even has this quality of a technological kind of association, because Prometheus gave us this technology that honestly is like the foundation of a lot of other technologies. So it kind of opens things up for us. But fire is also, unpredictable. It's changeable. It can get out of hand really fast. Right. And this is
that's so true. You can't control fire, as we've seen recently, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. And prayers and warm thoughts go out to anybody impacted by the fires in California this year, and the fires that will come again, surely, because it's just part of our experience now. But yeah, so then Prometheus was punished for that. What's interesting, I think, about that myth, I haven't actually shared this out loud or even thought about it much, but punishment is really more in the zone of Saturn. And I think punishment in this story, in the myth, I think we have to think about the presence of other planetary archetypes in this myth too. But Prometheus is the part that's breaking the rules. Yes. Right? And maybe the other gods that are punishing Prometheus, that's coming from this other planet. And interestingly enough, in our lives as humans, we often see this Saturn-Uranus dynamic, right? I talked about it earlier when we talked about breaking free from restrictions, but we also see it in breaking the rules, right? Somebody that I had in mind that has the Sun-Uranus conjunction is really fond of breaking the rules as well. As humans, we all have choice in how we embody these archetypes. I like to imagine that the outer planets especially are really impartial about how we use it. They're just making the energy available, or they're just correlating with the energy being available in our psyche, however you want to think of it. It's up to us in terms of how we want to use it. Some people embody Uranus just by fucking shit up, honestly. And that's their whole thing. And for others, it really is about helping other people break free from restrictions that are limiting their self-expression or just limiting them in many different ways, socially, financially, all the ways.
That's so true. And to your point, I think something that's really important for people to realize when it comes to planetary energetics is that there's a gradient, right? So there's fucking shit up and there's liberating people for their highest good. And people can use it in whichever way that they choose to, whichever way they express it. So there's no real way to determine which way some will use it. That's their own choice, but it can blossom and bloom in many different ways. And there's such a fear of, especially in relationship, losing someone. For instance, a transit to one's seventh house. My lover's going to leave me, or I'm going to get a divorce, when in actuality, it could just be revolutionizing your relationship in some way, injecting your relationship with that type of energy, which can, again, span the gamut according to the gradient of the planet.
Exactly. And, with the timing of things, getting back to that impartiality that we seem to observe with the outer planets, Uranus doesn't always really care about your feelings in terms of transits. It's just like, okay, I'm ready for you to be more yourself now. You might not like how it feels in this moment, but, maybe looking back, you'll get to see what the intention was. But yeah, absolutely. That fear of things falling apart, it's big for all of us. And we could also just call it the fear of change, right?
Absolutely. And that's a huge keyword for Uranus. Changes.
Exactly. Yeah. Change
Yeah.
happens. It's like,
Change happens.
sorry, all of you with Moon and Taurus.
Yeah. All right. Well, hopefully, with Uranus being at the end of it, they've gotten their shakedown and been able to really enjoy the electricity of Uranus in their lives. Can you get into your own, if you don't mind, your own Uranus aspects, and perhaps like in your relationship? I want to be accurate in the sense of saying, in order for Uranian relationships to exist, there does have to be some type of energetic of Uranus present, meaning typically some type of space, or you have to be outside of the box, or whatever kind of keywords that you choose. One of those has to hit. We're going to look at some relationships based on this fun BuzzFeed article that I read about unlikely couples. But Tony, take it away.
Oh, sure, sure. Happy to share a few things about my own. I have Venus Uranus conjunct in my natal chart, and my
Wow.
partner has Venus Uranus conjunct in his natal chart. And both of our
Wow.
cases, the aspect is configured to our ascendant. So for him, it's conjunct his ascendant, and for me, it's conjunct my ascendant ruler in the fourth house. So
Wow.
yeah, what's also interesting for him is Venus is the ruler of his seventh house. So it's
Wow.
Venus is always kind of there in terms of relationships, in terms of how we love. I don't
Mhm.
always think of it as describing the relationship itself. I think sometimes when we do that, we're doing a little too much planet sign house blurring. You've heard me talk about this as a student, but
Absolutely.
absolutely shows up in terms of how we love, how we connect with others, how we create bridges of rapport with others, and that's an obvious component of our relationships, right? So, but for
For
him,
sure.
it's specifically about the topic of one-on-one partnership. For me, it's in the fourth house, and it's in the same sign as the ruler of my seventh house, but not exactly in aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some of the technical
Mm-hmm.
details. I think as I was reflecting on your question about our relationship, there are some stories I could tell that would kind of give a sense of this dynamic. But I want to start with a little spoiler alert, because one of the things we're going to focus on when we talk about these famous folks today are May-December relationships. I have a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of that in mind, although it's definitely not as dramatic as the charts we're going to look at. So
Okay,
but
cool.
there's a 10-year age difference between me and Michael, and
Got it.
yeah. So for me, that was a big deal, because for many, many years, I just dated people within like this kind of 6-year zone around my own age.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And here's a little bit of Uranus coming through. I had rules for myself when I met Michael. I was in my 30s, and I had established some rules for myself based on previous relationships snafus, shall we say?
We've all got them.
Right. Right. One of those was don't date anyone before they've had their first Saturn return. One
Mm.
of them was get to know somebody for at least a year before you move in. I broke both of those rules. So I was really honoring my inner Uranus in that moment with Michael. And actually, I was celibate, intentionally celibate at the time that we met.
Wow.
And I had kind of like a time limit set on it. And I was talking to my therapist, and she was like, well, maybe you've gotten what you need out of this. And I was like, I just met this person and he's like perfect for me. And like, why
Mm.
now? I'm committed to being single so I can get, healthier in terms of how I approach relationship. And again, she said, well, maybe you've gotten what you need. So I agreed to go on a date, and we kept things platonic for about 4 months, and then not. Yeah.
Uranus moves pretty quick.
And once we started dating, we actually moved in a month later. It just seemed right. And but again, I was breaking all my rules. 19 years later, or it might be 20 at this point, we're still together. So
I love that.
It all worked out.
That is beautiful.
We also had a couple of moments early in our relationship that were very Venus Uranus. I think we both like our freedom to some extent, and our independence, and we both recognized that in each other from the beginning, and we both allowed each other that freedom. We actually experimented with having an open relationship in the first 2 years of our 2 years into our relationship. We met somebody that we both were attracted to, and we had a dating experience. We were in a throuple for a small amount of time, and then that relationship just didn't work out for many reasons. Nothing dramatic, but mostly it was that we moved to another city.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we have never done that again.
Okay.
We've just been.
And is it because you didn't meet anyone, or because you were like, you know what, that wasn't for us?
No, it wasn't. Like I said, it wasn't actually anything dramatic. And I think this is the Venus Uranus coming through, because sometimes it's about that sense of openness or freedom.
Yes.
We never actually changed the rule, but we never met someone else, and we never sought it out. Like, we weren't seeking it out. We weren't seeking it out the first time either. It just was a random occurrence, and it surprised us both, and we were surprisingly both open to it. And then ever since then, we've been not monogamous for the rest of the 16 years. So
that is I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing. There's so many different thoughts I had, and you were saying so many keywords, but also it's making me think of other things. Some people say Uranus is like the planet of friendship as well. It's sort of like you really accept each other very quickly. So that's why often it can be electric. Some people consider Uranus, Venus aspects like love at first sight. And it's because you extend this just true acceptance of who you are. And so when you have that, you can get down and dirty real quick. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
or at least, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, in our charts too, in their Sinistry, they're actually in sextile by sign. I don't think by degree. But yeah.
That's beautiful. Were either of you going through a Uranian transit when you met, or...
Our story was more Plutonian. We got together while I was having Pluto square Venus. I like telling this story to students because, yeah, right. I like telling this story to students because I had a reading at the time. I wasn't practicing professionally yet myself, and I knew enough to be dangerous, but I didn't ever do my own chart in this way. I still like to go to other astrologers and just hear their points of view. And this astrologer said to me, "Oh, you're having this Pluto square your Venus. You'll probably meet somebody, but it won't last. But you should probably experience it anyway because it'll be for your growth." And that was really not helpful.
Right.
It was really not helpful.
Right.
And also turns out it was just wrong. Right. We're still together. But what was really interesting about that transit for me is all of the intensity and difficulty of our relationship was front loaded.
I bet.
And it was kind of almost like, well, if you can handle this, you're going to make it through the rest. Right. So it had that kind of vibe to it. And once that transit was over, we haven't been in that kind of intensity ever since. It's just things kind of smoothed out and settled into a rhythm. We've had ups and downs, and we've had work to do like any relationship, but
sure.
But it's
especially for that long.
Exactly. But it's been great. And there's one other quick transit story I want to tell you though about Michael.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, he experienced Uranus crossing his descendant, opposing the ruler of his descendant. So
dun, dun, dun.
Opposing Venus. Yes, exactly.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right. So we were like, well, is this going to be the end? jokingly having those conversations. But honestly, I don't bring the astrology too much into our relationship in that way. So we were just observing to see what happened. And Michael's a Libra sun. And
Okay.
interestingly enough, the big Uranian event for him is that he individuated more in the relationship. Now he's still a Libra and he's still doing what I'm about to describe, but as you know, in true Libra fashion, he was really oriented to the other when he makes decisions.
Yes.
And also remember, Venus is ruling his his descendant and in his first
Mm-hmm.
house. So it's just that same statement's made another way in his chart. You get this classic story of, I say, where do you want to go for dinner? And he says, well, where do you want to go?
Whatever you like.
Right. Or I say, I want to do something. He says, sure. Most recently we were exploring other countries to live in, and I went and did a trip alone to explore this country, and he said, well, if you like it, I'll like it. So classic Libra, right?
Totally.
But during this Uranus transit, I noticed he was standing up for himself a little bit more. He was like, actually, I don't want to do that.
You're like, oh, word? Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
That was my response, honestly. I was like, I will celebrate that. That's great. I love seeing that. So but for him, it had that, sometimes Uranus transit will have that feisty edge, and it had that edge for him, right? Like, it was different than his usual MO, but it also helped him show up as more himself in the context of the relationship, which was really amazing.
That's awesome. I was going to say perhaps he had a little more defiance, especially with all of that Libra influence. Maybe he had to be a little extra feisty to be able to express it in that way.
Absolutely.
For all of you out there listening, if any astrologer or anyone ever tells you some doom and gloom story, the proof is in the pudding. There are so many different ways for planets to express themselves, and you really can't predict it. And that's one thing about Uranus, a saying that I love: work the transits or the transits will work you. A lot of people say, and I would be interested to hear your theory about this. I remember I was taking a class with Sam Reynolds, and he was saying, jokingly, like, when Uranus goes in the seventh, do things purposely different. If you're always doing missionary, do doggy style. If you're always doing this, do that. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that there's something in terms of bringing the energetic in yourself versus, waiting for it to express itself or kind of get you?
Absolutely. I love that approach. I think of it as intentional transits, like having intention with your transits, but actually, taking action. It also helps you have a sense of agency with your transits, but also gets into the realm of maybe astrological magic a little bit, where you're trying to intentionally invoke the energy. I think as long as you're not doing it from a place of trying to control the outcomes, and as long as you kind of have a healthy mindset there, it's really great to do. Really great to do. If for no other reason than it just helps you feel like you're doing something instead of waiting around to see what happens, right? Which is
exactly
always a better approach. So Uranus comes to your seventh house, and how can you shake it up? Or just ask yourself, does something need to be shaken up? Has something become stale or stagnant, or, to our earlier points, inauthentic?
Exactly. Another point that makes me think of is sometimes there's projection when you're having your own Uranus transits. And I actually experienced that. I was having Uranus to my Venus and dealing with this very Uranian man. You know what I mean? He's literally a scientist, and he was just so unpredictable and not conventional in terms of the relationship. He just wasn't conventional by any means of the words, and it was driving me nuts. And I had to realize, you know what? After we broke up, I felt this like breath of fresh air. And I remember my mom saying to me, like, you seem happier. And I was like, oh my God, I think I wanted to break up and I was putting it on him, and I think that especially in terms of women, I think it's changing a lot, but a lot of times we will tend to project that outside of ourselves instead of owning it and embodying it for ourselves in terms of breaking those rules, breaking the whole conventional standards. So I think
Absolutely.
that that's important to note too.
Yeah, I think that's always an important vantage point, whether you're turning it into turning your attention to your upbringing, your background, race, class, all of the things, because all those things are going to impact how you engage with the archetypes.
Exactly. Before we get into our celebrity couples, I did have a question. So there was a time when they considered Uranus to rule homosexuality. Would you still consider it to be outside of the norm or nonconformist, or does that change because society is more accepting of people's sexuality?
Yeah, I mean that's a great mind experiment or thought experiment. When I was taught about Uranus, I was taught that same thing, that like, Uranus is about doing something different according to the status quo, right? So if the
Mm-hmm.
status quo, if being gay is status quo, then Uranus is not actually doing something different. If astrology ever becomes totally mainstream, I mean, I think you could argue
Mm-hmm.
that it actually is. It's just not taught in the university, but millions of people are into astrology, at
Yeah.
least on a surface level,
Yeah.
or at least open to it, right, or interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
But once it becomes mainstream, is it really Uranian anymore? That's a great question. But interestingly enough,
Yeah.
I'm studying this new biography of Oscar Wilde right now in preparation for some thoughts about Saturn Neptune, because this year we have this great Saturn Neptune conjunction coming our way. And I did some research on Oscar Wilde's chart before, because he has Saturn Neptune aspect in his natal chart. And so I
Mm-hmm.
was catching up on this new biography with, it's got all this great new material in it. And I'm at this section right now where he's participating in this, what we would call today a gay subculture, although they didn't call it that. They were actually
Mm-hmm.
creating some of the elements that turned into the gay subculture. They had a literary journal already that was
Mm-hmm.
like, it was really coded, but it
Mm.
was a bunch of guys who were intentionally coding their experience into this journal in a way that could be sort of public and secret at the same time.
Wow.
And they used the word
So
Uranian
cool.
to describe. They were like
Whoa.
talking about their new Uranian relationships, and I think that came out of a direct
Wow.
connection to astrologers at the time who were talking about Uranus and figuring
Wow.
out the meaning of Uranus. So, but that, when I heard that word in the biography, of course my ears
Your
pricked up. Yeah,
astral ears perked up.
exactly. Yes.
For sure. Wow. That's so
So that
interesting.
idea goes way back. That idea goes way,
Yeah,
way,
clearly.
yeah, way back. But as with so many things in astrology, I think it's so important not to get hung up on some of those literal interpretations. And for every person that you find who is gay, who has Venus conjunct Uranus, I can find you 10 people who aren't. So
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah, so don't get too hung up on that idea, and don't go
Hmm.
thinking because like you're dating somebody and they've got a Venus Uranus aspect that they're not into you. That's not what that means.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
not at all. That is not what it means at
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, in terms of the energetic of the planet spans the gamut. So,
Totally. But yeah, it is part of that idea goes way back.
very cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was so fun. And yeah, I loved all of that. I think that'll help a lot of people in terms of, Uranus just in their relationships and their own charts, and just to understand it and not fear, fear not. Okay, so the first charts we're going to look at, Sarah Paulson and Holland Taylor. They have a 32-year age gap. They live in separate homes. According to societal norms, they couldn't be more Uranian. Now, in terms of the aspects, Sarah has a sextile from her natal Uranus in Scorpio to her Venus, which is in Capricorn, which I think is interesting because Venus in Capricorn tends to be, well, an iteration of it, right? Capricorn could be someone who's older and who's more mature. She also has a trine from her natal Uranus to her descendant in Pisces, and a sextile from natal Uranus to her ascendant, okay? Holland has Uranus trine to her Venus and square to her nodes. Sinistry wise, Paulson's Uranus in Scorpio squares Taylor's Mercury Venus in Aquarius, conjuncts her ascendant in the late degrees of Libra, and opposes her natal moon in Taurus, plus her descendant. Lastly, Taylor's Uranus in Gemini conjuncts Paulson's MC and oppose her natal Mars, square her ascendant and descendant. So there's a lot of synastry. There's a lot of Uranus present in the chart. Yeah, let's just chat about it.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things I noticed that I want to mention first, when you sent me, because you sent me a list of three couples,
Yeah.
and what I noticed about all of them, because I've done some of this research already, is that I think you're really tuned in to the out of bounds archetype and maybe didn't even know it. There is a Uranus story here that you found in all these chart examples, but there's also an out of bounds story. So I'll talk a little bit about that after we get into some of these chart details for sure, because it goes through all of the couples actually, in a very interesting way. Cool. So there's one other piece of synastry that I found really important between them, just to add into some of the things you listed there, which is that Paulson's Sun-Mercury conjunction is conjunct Holland's 7th house ruler Mars. Oh, wow. That's another interesting thread in the examples that you found, is connections to the 7th house rulers. So, and for those who are brand new to astrology who might be listening, the 7th house speaks to our one-on-one relationships, romantic relationships, committed relationships, marriage, all of those things. I'm an astrologer who doesn't think there has to be a legal document for it to be a 7th house relationship. There just has to be a real commitment. You know, if you're 2 weeks in, it's probably not a 7th house relationship. It's in the 5th house. But once you've gotten into that commitment zone, you're in the 7th. When people do stay together for a little bit or have a powerful connection with each other, you often see those kinds of synastry connections to the 7th house or the 7th house ruler. And we certainly have that here. And did you track down how long they've been together at this point?
It's, I think, 14 years.
Yeah, it's been. I knew it
they've been together
a
for a long time. Yeah.
Great.
And all of those things, like what I want to point out is, again, the fact that they're so different and they have that 32-year age gap. They live apart. You can really look at their charts and see why living kind of at a distance might be something that Taylor, I would say, is fond of. Her 4th house is Aquarius. Now, I'll say 2 things. So the ruler, according to modern astrology, is Uranus of Aquarius, but in traditional astrology, the ruler of Aquarius is Saturn. So let's be clear on that. Tony does not play those games. Okay.
Well, and
you've done your own research.
Can I qualify it a little bit? I'm really I like to try to stay as agnostic as possible with technique, and I'm definitely open-minded, but I've done some of my own research on traditional versus modern rulers, and I'm definitely not a traditional astrologer. I'm like 100% humanistic modern astrologer, but I've definitely done a lot of research and explored some techniques. And this was a question for me I had as a younger astrologer. So I took charts of folks actually, interestingly enough, focused on the 7th house, of people with Aquarius on the 7th house cusp. And I looked at their relationships to kind of see, does their relationship or the kind of partners that they're in relationship with, is that described more by Uranus or is it described more by Saturn? And in every case I've looked at, the Saturn stood out really strong and the Uranus didn't make sense as much. Now, this gets tricky to do on your own because a lot of us have strong Uranus aspects. So, even if you have Aquarius on the descendant and, Saturn is, technically the ruler, but you've got a strong Venus-Uranus conjunction, all bets are off.
Right, exactly.
That archetype is coming through loud and clear, right?
Right.
Yeah, so
I remember you saying that in class as well. Like, you might think it's because they're Aquarius, but there is a Uranus aspect somewhere in there. Yeah. And then a real light bulb that you said was, Uranus ain't fixed. Right. It's all about change, right. And Aquarius is very fixed. So I'm still doing my own research and kind of using both rulers for everything for now.
Yeah. And there are a lot of us.
I respect that.
And there are a lot of astrologers that do use both sets of rulers. Some of our instructors do that. And then some instructors only use modern rulers. Some only use traditional. So this is one of those areas in astrology where you just have to find your way. And I like to, I hope one thing I really get across in the program is that I'm not attached to what you choose, but I'm really attached to helping students make informed choices. So I can really help you figure out how to do that and send you down that road. And from that, at that point, you're kind of on your own. Maybe that's the Uranus coming through in my own chart, in my own way is kind of like giving you that freedom to find your own way. And
absolutely,
that's interesting here too. Both of these women have really important 4th house planets. So it's interesting. And Venus here in Holland's chart, and conjunct Mercury in Aquarius in the fourth. And actually, they both have Venus conjunct Mercury in the fourth in the house system that I'm working with right now. So that's interesting. And in Paulson's case, Mercury rules the ascendant and is in the fourth. And then in Holland's case, Venus rules the ascendant and is in the fourth. And we've got this fourth house story that's really interesting in their relationship. So there's a real direct connection with that correlation that you found between the Venus and Uranus and their desire to have separate homes. I've done readings for clients who've been together for 25 years and they have separate bedrooms. I've also done readings for couples with separate homes. I've done readings for couples who've been together for 12 years and they still haven't moved in yet. Right? But getting back to our earlier point, that's not status quo still right now, right?
Exactly.
When somebody says that, other people will raise their eyebrows. When people are raising their eyebrows, that might be a Uranian thing.
Wrong? Right. Exactly. And there are people, when Uranus transits happen, they just so happen to perhaps move into separate bedrooms, or
needing that space.
Something causes them to needing that space, or, oh, I got to move out of the country for my job, but you have to stay there and take care of the kids, or something like that. Kathy Rose, someone who is a great astrologer who teaches in Tony's program, what does she say? Like opening a window and letting fresh air in. And I love that analogy. Uranus, there's something about it that provides such a refreshing energy. I actually quite like it. It's probably because, I have a natal Uranus square my Mars. Just looking back on some of the times that I've had in my life when I've had those transits have been so liberating and fun and full of friendship too. I did notice a lot of camaraderie with a lot of different people. So that's super fun.
It can be stimulating and exciting, that energy. Yeah.
More keywords for us.
Yes. Well, speaking of keywords, getting back to the Venus-Uranus, one of the things that you're just describing in this example is if you have these aspects in your own chart and your relationship is taking on one of these qualities that is a little bit outside the box or different than the status quo, and let's use status quo in lots of different ways. We could use status quo in terms of the broader culture, but maybe you're part of a subculture, and in that subculture has its own status quo, right? Right. And then you've got that, or, and that can get real granular. That could be like, maybe you're really involved in your neighborhood and your neighborhood has its own status quo, or your family has its own status quo, or whatever.
I like that. It's deep. Yeah.
Exactly. And so if what you're doing goes against that, you'll have to face that Uranus friction in yourself. And what that friction is really asking of you or saying to you or inviting you to do is to just be yourself, even though other people are saying that's not right. In my opinion, if what you're doing isn't causing harm to yourself or others, and it still feels really authentic to you, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Absolutely. And it's a beautiful thing. Be yourself, no matter, what anyone says. If you're not hurting anybody, be your authentic self. There's nothing better than self-love and self-acceptance, and, go where you are accepted. That's what I say about that.
But you can imagine that Sarah and Holland, when they tell people they have different houses, people go, what's wrong with your relationship? Or that's weird, right? That's
the judgment.
That's Uranus. Yeah.
And what I was going to say also, when you were talking about when you have to face Uranian challenges, there's a couple of metaphors that I like to use. When Uranus is like, I need to get out, I say itchy sweater. It's like, if you're ever wearing an itchy sweater and it's just like, oh my God, I got to take this off. Like, this is driving me crazy. Or like a soda bottle shaken up. I always see that in my mind. You know what I mean? You shake it up and you leave it and it just needs to like get out. It needs to escape. It needs that freedom and space and non-containment.
That's really a brilliant image, the itchy sweater image, because we have an image with it, but it also conveys a feeling. And when you're trying to imagine into these archetypes, that feeling that you just described, Camilla, of the itchy sweater, that can be the feeling you're having in Uranus transit when something is really ready to shift. It feels uncomfortable, but it also feels like something you just have to do.
Right. And it also feels like you're on the precipice or the forefront of something fresh, new is on the other side after you take off this God-forsaken itchy sweater.
Exactly. And it feels so good. right? It feels so good.
By any means necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
But back to these charts, I don't know if you wanted to talk about out of bounds. Tony, if you can explain that to us, and Tony is definitely, in terms of knowledge about out of bounds, he's your guy. He's definitely the specialist. And I know nothing, so please. Sensei, do inform me.
So, out of bounds planets, there's an introductory article on my website, not written by me actually. It's called Those Wild and Crazy Out of Bounds Planets, I think, but it's a really great introductory article if you're brand new to the idea. Check that out on our blog at astrologyuniversity.com, because there's, I could talk about this for the next 3 hours, and I definitely want to do the short version right now.
I'll link to that, so you guys check out the link for that.
Okay, great. And so out of bounds refers to a measurement of declination, which is different than what you see if you've ever seen the horoscope or your own chart. What you're seeing in your own chart is a measure of celestial longitude, and declination takes us into celestial latitude. It gets more complicated than that, but that's in general a great way to think of it. And visually, a way to picture this in the sky is if you look in your chart and you see two planets conjunct and you look up in the sky, they might not be right next to each other. They only will be right next to each other if they're also parallel in declination. So if we put these two measurements together, we start to see the planets more in 3D instead of the 2D version that we have in the natal horoscope. So there's a little tiny bit of the technicals. We call a planet out of bounds when it gets really high in terms of its declination. We use the sun to define the limit of what high and low is, basically. In our current time, the sun can get as high as 23 degrees, 26 minutes north or south in declination. And in declination, we have this measurement north or south. If you're trying to look this up in your astrology program, you have to pull up an additional table. And in that table, where normally we see the glyph for the sign right after the degree of the planet, in declination, you're either going to see an S or an N or a plus or minus, and that just stands for north or south. Some of the planets can go higher than 23 degrees, 26 minutes in declination. When they do, we call them out of bounds. Two planets don't, Saturn and Neptune. And the joke among astrologers who use declination is that Saturn doesn't go out of bounds because it doesn't want to. Thank you very much. And Neptune doesn't go out of bounds because none of us could handle it.
Right. It's like it's already there.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, one of the things I discovered in my research with out of bounds planets is there's a strong correlation among folks who have Venus out of bounds with May-December relationships. This is one of those things that if not everybody who has Venus out of bounds is attracted to May-December relationships or finds themselves in those relationships. And in this case, we're talking about, as always with out of bounds, a little bit more in the extreme zone. So like myself and my partner are in a May-December relationship, but 10 years for most people it's not going to make most people uncomfortable. It would make some people uncomfortable, but it's at that edge where it's in a zone of normalcy. A lot of
not quite 32 years like our
not
Sarah
quite 30
Taylor.
years. But when I'm teaching this, I'll say go through ages in your head and think to yourself, I'm seeing this couple and they're 5 years apart. How do you feel inside? Okay, now I'm seeing this couple and they're 10 years apart. How does that feel? Okay, now they're 15 years apart. How does that feel? Now they're 20 years apart. For every one of us, there's going to be a number in there. It'll be different for each of us, but each of us is going to have a number where we start to go, I'm not sure about that one.
Like Bill Belichick, I feel like a lot of people are being tested with that number. He's in the news right now, or the media right now.
Exactly. And so, interesting to look up to see if they have out of bounds planets. It won't work all the time, but statistically, it's definitely higher than average. It stands out a lot. And even in this sample, the small sample, quote unquote random, like I said, I think you've got some out of bounds sensors inside you that you don't even know about yet, because you picked two examples that are in my research, Sarah Paulson and Cher, who we're going to talk about in a minute. So
super cool.
Cher also has Venus out of bounds. So that's interesting because Sarah Paulson has this Venus out of bounds. Like we said, both women have Venus in their fourth house, and they have this interesting May-December relationship where they have separate homes. It's all just right there in the astrology in such an interesting way. Planets out of bounds, it's able to exist kind of outside the box, outside the parameters of normalcy. It's able to define itself without restriction. It has a little bit less natural engagement with the archetype of Saturn. It doesn't tend to self-restrict or even kind of question. In this case,
I was going to say, it sounds kind of Uranian.
it sounds
like a higher octave of Uranus.
It is.
Or something.
Oh, I love that idea. Higher octave, because Uranus tends to react against, whereas out of bounds planets just tend to be.
Yes. I get that.
A great example, if you know the Icelandic musician Björk.
Love her.
Yeah. And she has Venus, Mercury, and Mars all out of bounds.
I'm not surprised.
And if you just, exactly. I mean, this one is just like, you get it instantly. When I say Björk, you're like, oh, okay, I know what that means.
Right? It's like, I don't give a fuck.
Exactly.
But I don't need to be contrarian or push against anything. Or
you got it.
There's no, is the revolution kind of taken out of it? You're just, because you're just being you?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. And it can, in a planet like Mars, it can lead to kind of being incredibly innovative and successful in competitive fields, because it's basically like taking the shackles off Mars. It's just giving it more freedom to be and do everything that it does. And in the case of Venus, which is about our likes and our dislikes and our attractions and aversions, sometimes we're attracted to things that might make other people uncomfortable. But, it's probably an out of bounds person that came up with that phrase, don't yuck my yum.
I love that phrase. And what a beautiful aspect to have, because it's sort of like you exist. You're not questioning yourself. You can really get into turmoil trying to be accepted by society, or giving yourself your own boundaries based upon parentals or what have you. So that's really cool.
And out of bounds people, this isn't going to, like everything in astrology, this isn't going to apply to everyone across the board. And we'll all have our different relationship, and our charts are complicated. And maybe you've got an out of bounds planet, but you've got Saturn on the ascendant, and you've got to listen to both voices inside you. But by itself, the out of bounds archetype or energetic or overlay on a planet doesn't tend to question itself. It's just like, this is what it is. This is what it is. So
my Virgo plan. So like, can I get some?
Can I get some?
My Neptune, like, can I have some out of bounds?
Yeah, I don't have Venus, Mercury, or Mars out of bounds. I question everything. A lot of self-doubt. Yeah.
But our charts are perfect.
That's right.
And they're supposed to be exactly what they are.
That's exactly right. I totally agree.
And another great point that I think that you brought up, that I think that's important for everyone to remember when studying astrology, it is all about layers.
Right.
So you can never go in and assume anything is pure and on its own, because there are aspects meaning planets touch each other and therefore are blending, reacting to each other in some way. They rarely or never exist outside of themselves unless they're unaspected, and that's super rare. I think it's a good segue on to Cher and AE's chart.
Great.
This one, I love this one. I think this is so fun. She's doing her thing. She looks fabulous. And I read something that said, like, she said that basically older guys or men her own age were always intimidated by her. And she said, hey, he just hit me up in the DMs and was like, hey, what are you up to? What's up? He was just confident and just playful. And she's like, I'm having a good time. So just a quick blurb about Cher and her partner AE. They have a 40-year age gap and come from extremely different yet uniting worlds. They're both in the field of arts. Cher is known as a singer, actress. You don't know Cher, get your head checked. And AE, I think he is a record label executive. He's known in the music world. He's a really creative person also. Cher has natally a Uranus-Venus conjunction in Gemini, in addition to a Uranus North Node conjunction. And transit-wise, Uranus aspected her 22-degree Pisces midheaven not long ago, and is currently a degree away from her natal sun. So she's in her Uranus bag, I'm sure, in the real, like, I don't give a shite. On top of not giving a shite because she's a natal sun Uranus girl, or lady, I should say. AE, we don't have a time for his chart, but he does have a square from his natal Uranus in Sag to his natal Jupiter in Pisces. Any type of aspects to Jupiter would expand that Uranus energy, and maybe you can weigh in on that. Like Cher, transiting Uranus is 1 degree from trining his natal sun, which is at 28 degrees at Virgo. Sinistry-wise, AE's Uranus opposes Cher's Venus, which is often viewed as a love at first sight aspect. It also trines her natal Mars-Pluto, sextiles her natal Jupiter, and squares her MCIC. While AE, we don't have his time of birth, his natal Jupiter in Pisces is squared by her Uranus.
Awesome. So one of the things about Cher, just to extend from our previous conversation, is she's got the Venus out of bounds, and that's correlating here with a bit of May, December. Not all of her relationships have had that quality, right? But her Venus is also conjunct Uranus. It's wide. It's a bit wide for anybody looking. It's about 9 degrees, and it is separating. But the North Node is right between them, and that creates just a little bit of a link. I think anything in between two planets that are wide creates a link between them. Think of them, all the things kind of holding hands together. But here we've got both of those archetypes we were just talking about, or both of those energetics is maybe a better word. I don't know if out of bounds is a whole archetype, but it's certainly an energetic. And we have that, I'm attracted to what I'm attracted to. And we also have a bit of the reaction and the feistiness coming through too. And as you said earlier, if you don't know Cher, then we probably all know Cher, and we're very aware of the feistiness that's there as well, right?
And that might have been my Mars Uranus coming through. No judgment if you don't know Cher, but look her up.
Well, and she has Mars Uranus too, right? She's got a Mars Uranus. She's got a Mars Uranus sextile. And
oh wow, she does.
And it's Mars conjunct Pluto, so it's not just feisty; it's forcefully feisty.
Love that play on words.
Right.
That was quick.
Yeah, so absolutely. So she's got this interesting blend of those archetypes, and I can kind of imagine her at this stage of her life as well. She's also somebody who's going to have her Uranus return, at some point. Here in the future coming up, that's coming to a theater near you for sure. And that's really for older folks, if you know anybody that gets to that kind of 84-year-old zone and they still have their wits about them, they often get a new level of the I don't give a fuck,
Kiss my ass.
That's what it is. That's
on both sides.
That's what it is. Yes.
Kiss both cheeks.
Thank you.
Twice.
Thank you.
Thrice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's
awesome.
Yes. I'm just gonna.
If you've lived long enough to stay on this earth for that long, I think everybody needs to be like that.
I'm not going to be anybody else but me at that point. That's how that goes. Yeah. So that's coming through, and you can imagine her having to kind of respond to people questioning her relationship with this fella, and that's the attitude she's bringing, right? Right?
Yeah.
And it might it's also the attitude she brought to picking him in the first place, right? She's just going to be her, and that's how it goes. Interestingly enough, he has Mars out of bounds.
Wow.
And guess where his Mars is? It's out of bounds, conjunct her 7th house moon.
Oh. Woo, and we all know about that moon Mars. That's that can be a juicy one.
Yeah, moon Venus, or Mars Venus and Mars moon, and we're gonna see Mars Venus next. Yeah, so we can see the attraction. Yeah, we can see the attraction. We can imagine a little bit of what's there for her. Yeah.
Sparks are flying.
Yeah, that's great. Interestingly enough, I just went down a rabbit hole with Cher because I hadn't done the Sinistry before, but we talk about Cher. She kind of came onto the scene as part of a duo, and Sunny and Cher, and there's a whole interesting thread between their charts. With her MC ruler is Jupiter, square the moon in the 7th, and the ruler of the 7th is trine the midheaven, indicating in her own chart that there could be some kind of connection between partnership and career. And then when we get to his chart, we see that his descendant ruler is trine her Venus, and his descendant ruler is square her descendant ruler. I mean, they were together for a long time and made a big impact together. I mean, for those, for young people who know Cher now, they might not even know or remember know anything.
Sunny and Cher.
She's been through so many different iterations of herself, and she's somebody who has staying power. Which is kind of hard to do in her field. But in one of her...
And to your point, that reinvention as well, I think is very Uranian.
Absolutely.
Too.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, the power of reinvention. We can sometimes see that with Pluto when it's like a transformative reinvention, like I almost become someone else. But with Uranus, it's just that I'm going to shake it up. Yeah.
Shake it up. Now, the last couple that we are going to take a look at Sam and Aaron Taylor Johnson, who I'm not very familiar with, transparently. But again, they have this kind of May December thing going on. They have a 24-year age gap, and they met on set when he was 18 and she was 42. They've been married for 5 years. And in terms of synastry, Aaron's Venus in Taurus trines his Uranus. In addition, he has a tight square from Uranus to his natal Mars. So that's the, I have it. Don't tread on me. Don't tell me what to do. Or perhaps, maybe someone's using it in another way, being really inventive or something like that, or just authentic with their choices or their actions. Sam has a natal Sun Uranus opposition, a Moon Uranus square, and a tight sextile between Jupiter and Uranus. Synastry wise, Aaron's Uranus square Sam's natal Venus and a sextile her Mars, while Sam's Uranus trines Aaron's Venus, squares the Sun. So they've got a lot of aspects there in terms of Uranus. I don't know if you have anything to weigh in on
Yeah,
that.
totally. Well, the first thing I'm going to look at in the May December is does either of them have Venus out of bounds? And neither one does, but they both have an out of bounds planet. And Aaron
Mm.
has Uranus out of bounds, and
Oh, wow.
Sam has the moon out of bounds. Now, just for
Wow.
those listening who might be new to astrology, we don't have the birth times for either one of these folks. So we don't know the houses, we don't know their ascendants, we don't know their descendant. So when we've been talking
Mm-hmm.
about the seventh house with some of these other folks, we can't do that with this couple, and that's
Right.
a pretty big deal. But there's a lot that we can do, and there's a strong story here that I think we can see when we dig a little bit deeper with the synastry in terms of
Mm.
kind of evaluating that quality in their relationship. It's also just one of those chart examples that reminds you that when you find something in astrology that correlates often with something specific, it's not going to work every time. So circling back to those out of bounds planets, even though one of them isn't Venus, they each have in their own personality makeup. And you've already kind of talked about how Uranus is important in Aaron's chart personally, but they each have an out of bounds quality that they're channeling. So when they come together, they're bringing that. And I have come across Aaron in movies because I'm a big, movie fan, and I've seen,
Yes.
way more movies than a person probably should. And but the thing that really stood out, Aaron really stood out for me with this YouTube video that you can find of him dancing. And I can't remember what the video is called, but if you just type in Aaron Taylor Johnson dancing, it'll come right up. It's amazing. He's like an amazing dancer and has this incredible physicality. Definitely
Really?
interesting to look up. Okay, so
And he has Mars out of bounds.
he has Uranus out of bounds, but he has Mars square Uranus and Neptune.
Woo!
Yeah, so you're
Wow.
getting the Uranus connection there, and the Mars
Mm-hmm.
Uranus is really tight, really tight. Okay, hold
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
thought, because in this couple's story, I think we're seeing that Mars Uranus, because when
Mm.
you look up info about them, Sam has gotten criticized and attacked by people. She's been accused of grooming Aaron because
Yeah.
they met on the set of a film when he was 18 and she was 42.
Yep.
So that's going to take people into that zone, right? But as
Mm-hmm.
both of them tell the story, he was the pursuer. And also people
Mm.
said, who were on that set, said the chemistry between them was palpable. It was
I
something
bet.
that everybody noticed, and it turns out Aaron's Mars is almost exactly conjunct Sam's Venus. And
Wow.
there's the Mars Venus
Beautiful.
story too, because he was the pursuer. There's his Mars to her Venus, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Venus, to Tony's point, magnetizes, it receives, and Mars is that yang energy. It goes after what it wants.
Yeah, interesting. Interestingly enough. So I think probably we can just imagine that in their coming together, he's got this Mars Uranus, and he's like all the qualities we've been talking about of just following the beat of his own drum, but also being reactive to anybody kind of criticizing that, and her
Mm-hmm.
having the moon out of bounds and maybe being open to something a little bit different outside the box. And now
Mm.
they've been together for 16 years. So
That is incredible.
she says in interviews that the age gap never comes up between them in their relationship, which is interesting as
Wow.
well.
Wow. That is so interesting. I wonder what their, living habits are and that kind of thing, or if, the only Uranian thing is the age difference. I'd be very curious to know,
Right.
to be a fly on a wall. I think it's so cool. It's beautiful.
Right, exactly. And then, as you pointed out earlier, it's also really interesting to think that while neither of them has a really strong Venus Uranus, according to some of our, I mean, he's got a Venus Uranus trine, but it's a bit wide.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't really have Venus Uranus in aspect. They do
Mm-hmm.
get it in synastry because there's a Venus
Mm-hmm.
Uranus connection in their synastry. So that's really interesting. It's like when they come together, they're activating that Venus Uranus potential.
Yes, I love that. It's electrifying.
Right. Yeah, it's her Venus to his Uranus. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's defying, some of the superstitions of some people say Venus Uranus. It is electrifying and love at first sight, but it is non-lasting. The one of the many things you'll hear is, "Oh, have fun. It won't last long," or it will be, on and off type of thing. So I like defying those kind of stereotypes.
Yes, that's so important and such an important point for the listeners, Camilla. Just that absolutely all these examples, well, maybe except for Cher, that's a new relationship for her, but in the context of other relationships. But there's plenty of examples of people who have strong Venus Uranus in all of the ways that we've talked about today and ways that we haven't talked about today that have long relationships. So it doesn't really say anything about the longevity, right? It says something about how you do the relationship, right? And
Exactly.
that's true of every astrological aspect.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great segue. There's a part of AstroPop where we just kind of give antidotes to people who may possess the aspect or, might know that the transit is coming up, as we said before, to their own Venus, to their own seventh house, perhaps to their partners. What are some antidotal things that you think would be good for someone with this particular planetary aspect or energetics in order to just live it the best and to evolve as opposed to kind of like shying away from it or letting the transit work you?
I'm going to take your itchy sweater image from earlier and mix it with the thing I usually say. And I'm going to say, keep the itchy sweater on as long as you can. And the idea behind that is sit with the discomfort that's coming up and get to know it, because this process is about you individuating. So one of the mistakes I have seen clients make and have tried to help them clean up afterwards is Uranus comes along and, the middle finger in you can sometimes come up really quick, right? Where you're like, fuck this, I'm out of here, right? It's that vibe, right?
I've done it. I've quit jobs.
Exactly. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. And this is a real example.
Yeah.
This isn't a made up story. I had a client come to me who, was trying to put his life together after leaving a job. And basically Uranus had come to his midheaven and he said, fuck this job, I'm out of here. This isn't me. I hate this job. And something happened and he quit the next day, right? 2 years later, he came to me because he still hadn't found a new position.
Mm-hmm.
This
Mm-hmm.
is real.
Yeah.
This is real, right?
Very
And the
real.
point of the story is the Uranus impulse is real. He really did need to leave the job, but we all have Saturn in our charts too. We don't get to just live in Uranus world. Right?
That's right. Saturn rules consequence.
Saturn rules the consequences, and we all have a second house, and we all have if we have a house and we have to pay the rent or the mortgage, the rent comes due, and
Material.
yeah. So you need to weigh in all the factors. So if he had come to me while he was having that transit, I would have said, it sounds like you really got to get out of there. So what can you do? Can you make a plan, right? Start putting yourself out there, get things in order, right? To make that change. Now, sometimes the story isn't always in the realm of like easy choice like that, where the person can choose to stay there and it's just that somebody irritates them there, or it's not exactly the
Exactly.
role they want to be in. They want to be in a slightly different role that's more them. That can be Uranus too. But some of us are in situations that are harmful to us and difficult in extreme ways. And in those cases, by all means, take the itchy sweater off as quickly as possible. Just get out of there. Just get out of there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not talking about those kind of situations. But in the situations where you don't have to make the change, sit with the discomfort a little bit, get to know it, see what it's really about. Because sometimes the shift that you need to make might not be as big as it seems in the moment. There might be a little shift. I've definitely seen people go from I'm thinking of a client of mine right now who moved from one department to another. When we first started talking, she's like, I hate this company. I don't want to do this. I got to get something else. And then she basically had an opportunity to move to a different team. And it turns out she didn't hate the company. She hated her team.
Wow.
And everybody on this new team was really cool. And she got along with them. And the job responsibilities were really clear. And she was a good fit for them. And it all kind of came together, right? So
to your point, infusing some change in some way.
Yeah, honoring the change, inviting the change. And that's another great image to hold, or idea if a transit's coming up with Uranus is, I like to say, stay nimble on your feet, right? Be nimble, be ready to pivot, you know.
Yes.
We've got Jupiter and Gemini right now, so we've been pivoting all over the place. Pivot's a great Gemini word too, but Uranus is like, it's a little bit more amplified. It's a little bigger. These are bigger pivots. It's that lightning strike that hits, and then you have to respond. So be ready. It's not a great time.
Be flexible.
It's not a great time to be attached. Sometimes we don't get to pick leaving the job. Sometimes the middle finger gets aimed at us and we get fired or laid off, right? And that's Uranus too. And you have to deal with that aftermath. So your attachment's only going to cause suffering at that point. So surrender your attachment and just respond to what arises. Yeah.
That's beautiful, beautiful. And two things you said, the pivot, I wrote down, pivot is paramount. I wrote that down when I was like with Uranus, because it's true. You need to be flexible. You need to be malleable, because again, if you're on a roller coaster, or if you're holding on to something and it's shaking, you're going to like be ragdolled, you're going to get injured kind of thing. And if you just let go, and to Tony's point, surrender, you can reap some of the benefits. And when you're on the other side of it, it seems like there are no benefits, but there's always a benefit somewhere, a silver lining to liberation. Tony, what would you say to people who are on the other side of the transit, perhaps receiving a shock kind of breakup, the kind of thing that breaks you open that you're not expecting? What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the circumstances, but one thing is, take care of your tender parts in your heart first, like attend to that, because that is an element of Uranus that we haven't talked about as much today, is the shock, right? We've talked about the lightning strike, but that comes with a shock as well. So, and you talked earlier about dissociation. So what do you need to do to come back in from the cold? That's important to think about in those moments. And coming back into yourself and doing that self-care, interestingly enough, will also help you tap into some of the Uranus process that's trying to happen about individuation. I don't think it's helpful to say to somebody who's just in the midst of one of those kind of breakups where it wasn't their choice, it was the other person's, and it hurts. So something was stripped away from you in that lightning strike.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say what I'm about to say to that person in that moment. But what we can see with a bit of time is, in a lot of those cases, a person will look back and say, I needed that. Now I can see that relationship wasn't actually good for me either. Right. And now that I'm on the other side and I really am being more of myself, if that person came back into my life, I'd say, no, thank you. Right. But when you're in the midst of that kind of change or transformation, that idea is not always helpful. Helpful. So what is helpful to hear is, what do you need to do to come back into yourself? What do you need to do to heal yourself, to be present with the hurt and the pain of the separation? Take care and attend to that. And then when you're ready, it's time to start doing some self-inquiry. Is there something about this relationship that wasn't a great fit for me either? How was I showing up in the relationship? What was I contributing? How did I participate? And maybe the most important question, how can I show up more authentically in the next relationship?
Absolutely. I think that's super powerful, because I think sometimes in relationship, people kind of, they can just stay together to be with someone, or just because they've
Yeah.
been together, or because it's quote unquote easy. But to your point, when you're doing that, that is inauthentic.
Right.
That is inauthentic. You're just kind of playing along, and the universe, or whatever your beliefs are, they want you to be authentic. They want better for you. They want the highest for you. And so sometimes they will shock you, with these Uranian things. And it's not to, negate or say that the pain isn't real, because woo, that like shock, heartbreak, like literally my heart, I can feel it. There's honestly nothing worse than that. It's
Hmm.
debilitating. But as Tony said, like once you pick up those pieces again and put yourself together, there's something inside of you that's like, okay, empowered by that Uranian transit, and you've been thrown into, authenticity. But, what better way to exist? Why are we here on this planet other than to be authentic and our true selves, which our charts reflect so beautifully?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Oh, Tony, I want to thank you so much for like sharing, for joining me. I think you're one of the best astrologers out there for so many reasons. You're so committed to it. You're so accurate. And you're really loving. As a teacher, Tony extends himself in ways like you just can't imagine. So I can't say enough. Thank you from the bottom top round of my heart, and really appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate you too. It's been a real pleasure. And thanks so much for inviting me to the show.
All right. Thank you for joining us at AstroPop. And you got to check out all the links below. Again, find out more about Astro University. I'm going to put that little dance in there. And also Out of Bounds Planets. You're going to go down a rabbit hole after that, because when he told me a little bit, I went down, well, I went far enough to see I don't have any. But maybe you'll go a little further than me and just learn about that particular. Is it considered an aspect, or just no? It's
It's a quality,
a
maybe is the best
quality.
way to think of it. Yeah, it's not an aspect. There are declination aspects.
Mm-hmm.
They're the parallel and the contraparallel.
Mm-hmm.
Out of bounds is just maybe a state. It's a state. Let's call it that.
Right, state. But thank you so much for joining us. Ta ta
All
for
right.
now.